Every kingdom has a story about succession, about who comes next, about the son who inherits everything his father built. But Solomon's story doesn't begin with inheritance. It begins with a crisis. David was dying, the greatest king Israel had ever known, the shepherd boy who killed a giant, the man who united a broken nation, the warrior who expanded the kingdom from a small tribal confederation into a regional power, was old and bedridden, unable even to keep himself warm. And while he lay there, something ancient and ugly began to stir. His son Adonijah decided to make himself king. Adonijah was handsome. He was the oldest living son. He had chariots and horses and 50 men to run ahead of him, the display of a man who expects to be obeyed. And crucially, he had support. Joab, the commander of the army, was with him, and Abiathar the priest was with him. He held a feast and invited his brothers and the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite Solomon. The prophet Nathan went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and told her what was happening. "Go in to King David and say to him, 'Did you not promise that Solomon would reign after you? Then why has Adonijah become king?'" Bathsheba went to David. Nathan followed. Together they reminded the dying king of his promise. David, from his bed, gave his final orders. Solomon was placed on the king's own mule, a powerful symbol of royal transfer. He was brought to the spring of Gihon. Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anointed him king over Israel. They sounded the trumpet, and all the people shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" When Adonijah and his guests heard the noise of the city and the sound of celebration, they understood immediately what had happened. His guests fled. Adonijah went to the altar and grabbed hold of the horns of the altar, the ancient gesture of a man seeking sanctuary, appealing to divine mercy. Solomon sent for him. "If he shows himself to be worthy, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, but if evil is found in him, he will die." Adonijah came to Solomon and bowed down before him. Solomon sent him home. The throne was secured. The transition was complete. But before David died, he called Solomon to his side and gave him a charge that was both political and spiritual. He told him to be strong, to walk in God's ways, to keep his commands. And then, and with the practicality of a man who had survived decades of court politics, he gave Solomon specific instructions about specific people, who to deal with carefully, who had been loyal, who carried old debts. Then David died, and Solomon sat on his father's throne. He was probably still a teenager, maybe 20 years old, inheriting the most complicated kingdom in the region, with enemies on every border and rivals inside his own court, with expectations no human being could realistically carry. Early in his reign, Solomon went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices. It was the most important high place of worship at the time, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings there. That night, God appeared to him in a dream. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Imagine that. A blank check from God. Ask for anything. Well, Solomon could have asked for the death of his enemies. He had enemies. Adonijah's supporters were still around, some of them dangerous. He could have asked for wealth beyond measure. His father's kingdom was prosperous, but the ancient world ran on gold and silver and trade. He could have asked for long life, for military victory, for fame that would last forever. He asked for none of those things. "I am only a little child," Solomon said. "I do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours? A discerning heart, the ability to tell right from wrong, wisdom to govern justly. God's response tells us everything about what that request meant. Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. He asked for wisdom. He received wisdom and everything else on top of it. Solomon woke from the dream. He returned to Jerusalem and stood before the Ark of the Covenant and offered burnt offerings and sacrifices. Then he gave a feast for all his court, and wisdom began to manifest almost immediately. 2 women came to him with a terrible dispute. They lived in the same house. Both had given birth to sons within days of each other. One baby had died in the night. The mother had rolled over on him in her sleep. Now each woman claimed the living child as her own. There were no witnesses, no evidence, no way to know the truth through normal means. Solomon called for a sword. "Cut the living child in 2, he said, "and give half to one and half to the other." One woman said, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in 2. The other woman said, "Please, my lord, give her the living baby. Don't kill him." Solomon said, "Give the living baby to the second woman. Do not kill him. She is his mother." When all Israel heard the verdict, they held the king in awe. They saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice, and this was the beginning. What followed was 40 years that Israel would remember for the rest of its history as the high water mark, the golden age, the moment when everything was possible and everything was achieved. Solomon's wisdom was not just practical. It was encyclopedic, creative, literary. The Bible tells us he spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He taught about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He taught about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. Kings from every nation sent their representatives to listen to his wisdom. Among them came the Queen of Sheba, a ruler from a distant land, probably in what is now Ethiopia or Yemen, who had heard reports about Solomon and came to test him with hard questions. She came with a very great caravan, camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones. She arrived and talked with Solomon about everything she had on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for him. When she saw his wisdom, his palace, the food at his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, and the burnt offerings he made at the temple, she was overwhelmed. She said to him, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard." But even greater than his wisdom was what he built. David had wanted to build a temple for God. God had told him no. "You are a man of war. Your hands have shed blood. That task belongs to your son." Solomon was that son. He began construction in the 4th year of his reign. He drafted 30,000 workers from Israel, sent in shifts of 10,000 a month to Lebanon to work with the craftsmen of King Hiram of Tyre. 80,000 quarried stone in the hills, 70,000 carried loads, 3,300 supervised the work. 7 years, That's how long it took to build the temple. The dimensions, the materials, the craftsmanship. The Bible describes them in extraordinary detail because the people who recorded this account understood that they were describing something unprecedented. The inner sanctuary overlaid with pure gold. The 2 cherubim of olive wood, each 15 feet tall, in their wings spanning the width of the room. The 2 bronze pillars at the entrance, each 30 feet tall with elaborate capitals. The bronze sea, a massive circular basin supported by 12 bronze bulls, capable of holding 11,000 gallons of water. Thousands of gold bowls and silver basins and utensils and lampstands. When the Ark of the Covenant was brought into the temple, the Ark that had traveled with Israel since the wilderness, that had crossed the Jordan, that had been in the tabernacle for generations, the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud that filled the temple. The glory of God filled his house. Solomon stood before the entire assembly of Israel and lifted his hands toward heaven. He prayed one of the longest and most comprehensive prayers in the Old Testament, a prayer for forgiveness, for justice, for deliverance in times of drought and famine and plague and war, a prayer that reached forward in time to cover every situation his people might face in the years ahead. He ended with these words, "May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, and may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need." When Solomon finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and the sacrifices. The glory of the Lord filled the temple. The priests could not enter the temple because the glory of the Lord filled it. All the Israelites saw the fire coming down and the glory of the Lord above the temple. They knelt on the pavement with their faces to the ground, and they worshipped and gave thanks to the Lord. It was, by any measure, the peak, the absolute summit of everything Israel had ever been or would ever be in the ancient world. But even in the Golden Age, there were shadows. To build all that he built, the temple, his own palace which took 13 years, the wall of Jerusalem, the cities for storage and for chariots, Solomon used forced labor. 30,000 Israelites drafted. Thousands of foreign workers conscripted from the peoples remaining in the land. The taxes were heavy. The burden was real. The people felt it, even as they marveled at what was being built. And then there were the marriages. The Bible says Solomon loved many foreign women, the women from nations the Lord had specifically told Israel not to intermarry with: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. Nations where other gods were worshipped, nations where the practices God had called abomination were part of ordinary life. Solomon clung to these women in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. 700 wives, 300 concubines. The Bible doesn't present this as mere excess or as the expected behavior of ancient kings. Though both of those things were true, it presents it as the specific failure that everything else would flow from. Because as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. And he followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. He followed Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites, a god whose worship involved child sacrifice. He built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab. He did the same for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The wisest man who ever lived, the man who had been given supernatural discernment by God, the man who had prayed at the dedication of the temple with such eloquence and depth, the man who knew better than almost anyone who had ever lived, building altars to gods whose worship involved burning children. This is the tragedy at the center of Solomon's story. Not ignorance. He knew exactly what he was doing. Not weakness of a sudden moment. This was the slow drift of decades, compromise by compromise, accommodation by accommodation, until the man who had asked for wisdom was doing the things wisdom most clearly condemned. The Lord was angry with Solomon. God appeared to him again, as he had appeared at Gibeon, as he had appeared when the temple was dedicated. And he said, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of your father David, I will not do it during your lifetime, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son." The kingdom would be split, not now, a mercy for David's sake. But the split was coming. The seeds were already planted, and enemies began to rise. Hadad the Edomite, Rezon of Damascus, and within Israel's own borders, a man named Jeroboam, a capable official whom Solomon had put in charge of the labor force of the tribes of Joseph. The prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam on the road and tore his new cloak into 12 pieces, giving 10 to Jeroboam. "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord says. I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." Solomon heard about it and tried to kill Jeroboam. Jeroboam fled to Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. There is a book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes. Most scholars believe it was written by Solomon in his old age, or at least reflects his voice and his perspective at the end of a life of extraordinary achievement and catastrophic compromise. It begins with a word that appears 38 times in the text. In Hebrew, hevel, often translated as vanity, but the literal meaning is closer to vapor, breath, something real for a moment, and then gone, leaving no trace. "Vanity of vanities," says the teacher. "All is vanity." He describes searching for wisdom, and finding that with great wisdom comes great sorrow, and increasing knowledge increases grief. He describes trying pleasure, wine, great projects, gardens and parks and reservoirs, slaves and herds, silver and gold, singers and harems, more than anyone before him in Jerusalem. He withheld nothing his eyes desired. He refused his heart no pleasure. And then he looked at everything his hands had done, everything he had toiled to achieve. Everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. He describes watching the cycle of generations. One goes and another comes. The sun rises and sets and rises again. Rivers run to the sea, and the sea is never full. There is nothing new under the sun. The person who lived before us is not remembered, and the person who comes after us will not be remembered by those who follow them. He watches the living and sees their suffering. He watches the dead and thinks, "Better them than the living." And he looks at the one who has not yet been born and thinks, "Better still, for they have not seen the evil that is done under the sun." This is Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, the man who had more wealth and more pleasure and more achievement than any person of his era, sitting at the end of his life, writing about vapor. And yet, and this is crucial, Ecclesiastes does not end in despair. After 38 uses of the word hevel, after all the searching and the finding of emptiness and the honest accounting of what wisdom and wealth and pleasure could and could not provide. The book ends with a conclusion, clear and simple. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. The man who had built the greatest temple in the world, who had spoken 3,000 proverbs, who had been given supernatural wisdom by God, and then spent decades drifting away from the very source of that wisdom. At the end, he came back to the beginning. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Not because it will make you rich, not because it will make you famous, not because wisdom and obedience will protect you from suffering or from the consequences of your own failures, but because it is the duty of all mankind, because everything else, the wisdom, the wealth, the achievements, the pleasures, the 1,000 wives, is vapor. Solomon reigned for 40 years. He died and was buried in the city of David his father. His son, Rehoboam, succeeded him. And within a year of Rehoboam taking the throne, exactly what God had said happened. Jeroboam returned from Egypt. He and all Israel came to Rehoboam with a request: lighten the heavy yoke your father put on us. Rehoboam consulted the elders. They advised gentleness. He consulted his young friends. They advised severity. He chose severity. My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Israel revolted. 10 tribes broke away under Jeroboam. Only Judah and Benjamin remained with the house of David. The kingdom that David had built and Solomon had made glorious split in two, never to be reunited. Solomon's story is one of the most uncomfortable in the Bible because the failure at its center cannot be blamed on ignorance or circumstance or the cruelty of other people. He knew. He always knew. The man who wrote about the strange woman whose lips drip honey but whose end is bitter as gall, he married her 700 times. The man who wrote that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. He built the most extravagant palace in the region and took 13 years doing it while the people bore the tax burden. The man who received wisdom from God as a direct gift, who spoke with God twice, who built a house for God and watched fire come down from heaven to consecrate it. That man built altars to Molech and Chemosh and Ashtoreth on the hill east of Jerusalem. Wisdom is not the same as obedience. Knowledge is not the same as faithfulness. You can understand the truth completely and still choose otherwise. This is perhaps the most chilling thing Solomon's life demonstrates, that the gap between knowing and doing is not bridged by more knowledge. It is bridged by something else, something harder, something that has to be chosen again every day, not just understood once in a dream. And yet, the temple stood. For generations it stood, the place where God had said His name would dwell. The books Solomon wrote are still read. The wisdom collected in Proverbs still guides. Ecclesiastes still speaks with an honesty about human experience that no self-help book has ever matched. The Song of Solomon still describes love with a beauty that takes the breath away. The gifts remained, even when the giver drifted. The tragedy is not that Solomon achieved nothing. He achieved more than almost anyone in the ancient world. The tragedy is the gap between what he could have been and what he became, between the young man at Gibeon who asked only for a discerning heart and the old man on the hill east of Jerusalem building one more altar to one more foreign god, and then sitting down to write, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." He knew. In the end, he knew. Fear God. Keep his commandments. It was the answer he had been given at the beginning, lost somewhere in the middle, and found again at the end. The question his life asks every one of us is simple. How many years will it take you to get back to the beginning? The fire is low. The night is quiet. The answer is always the same. It is always enough. It is never too late. Fear God. Keep his commandments. That's it. That's all of it.